A warm welcome to our partnership panel. These panels are a forum for learning experts and people managers in global organisations to come together in a purposeful way to drive performance. I'm Lucy Phillip and I'm the CEO and founder of Purposefully Blended. We're a boutique consultancy that specialises in developing learning and development professionals and transforming leaders into compassionate coaches. We believe that when learning professionals work in strong partnership and alignment with people managers, that's where learning transfers into behaviour change and performance. We're delighted to host talented and experienced global leaders on our panels, working for some of the biggest organisations in the world. It's important to note that the opinions of our panellists are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions and beliefs of their organisation. We hope you enjoy the episode. Today we're going to be focusing on the influence pillar of the Purposefully Blended Impact System, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome a fabulous panel to talk specifically about how learning professionals can engage managers to play a more active part in embedding learning. And I can already see down in the audience that there's many familiar faces that are probably welcoming the opportunity to get the answer to this question, because it really sits on many of our lips and takes up a lot of airtime in terms of learning professionals thinking about how can we really make that happen. So I'm going to hand over quickly to my panel just to introduce themselves and share a little bit about themselves. Can I go over to you first, Marcella?
Yeah, absolutely, Lucy, and thanks for having me here. As you know, I'm here with my coffee, connected from Chicago, starting the day this Friday. And my name is Marcello. I've been working in the learning space for over 20 years at this point in different geographies and different industries. And I'm very passionate about the impact of what learning, change management, performance initiative have on large organization. That's my usual scope of work at scale. And that's where this topic becomes extremely important.
Fantastic, that's great. And then over to you, Cheryl.
Thanks, Lucy. Thanks for the invite and hello, everybody. Very similar to Marcello, worked in pharmaceuticals for over 20 years. I'm currently the group head of sales excellence for a company called Animal Care, which is an animal health company. Previous to that, I worked in AbbVie and Pfizer over a variety of commercial roles and learning roles. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion, and hopefully I will learn something myself from the discussion as well. So thank you, Lucy.
That's great. Thanks, Cheryl. And then last but by no means least, over to Joanna.
Thank you, Lucy. Hello, everyone. I'm Johanna. I work at Atlas Copco as a learning professional for the group learning team here at Atlas Copco. I'm based out of Sweden, Stockholm. I'm really excited, of course, to be on this meeting today. I am also very passionate about learning, of course. I've been in the industry about 10 years, and I work a lot with manager involvement and different learning initiatives on group level. So I'm excited for this conversation.
Thanks so much, all of you. I think the intros from our panel really demonstrate the global nature of the roles that we're often taking on. So not just engaging people within our own countries that we live, but engaging managers and other learning professionals right across the globe. And that's really what we all have in common here, is how can we make that happen? So the way that this session will run is that I will pose a series of questions to our panel, and they will discuss between them their experiences, challenges, top tips, in the hope that our audience will benefit from their wisdom. And they also, as panellists, will benefit from being able to discuss some of the common challenges that we still don't have the answers to as learning professionals and leaders. At Purposefully Blended, we really believe that we achieve more by being together and supporting one another. And that's what we want to achieve through these partnership panels. The opportunity to discuss and find answers for some of the problems that we all face, regardless of the roles, the industries, the countries that we work in. So we want to create that safe community here where people feel that they're able to discuss freely. Let's kick off with the why. So it's always good to start with why things are important. So I want to start by really thinking about, why is it so important that we engage managers in learning? And I'm going to come over to Cheryl first to share her insights as to why she thinks we need to do that.
Thanks, Lucy. I guess from my perspective, I've been a manager and a learning professional, so I guess I see it from both sides of the fence. And I guess from with a learning hat on, we all know how difficult it is to transfer learning and for the application of learning to actually happen once someone has been through a learning program, or at least the beginning of a learning program. And I think the data around retention of learning a week, a month after a learning program is pretty low in terms of percentages. I think the percentage is about 15% of application after a learning program on average. So I guess what it suggests as a learning professional is we need some help in terms of the application phase of learning, and with line managers being, I guess, what I would regard as being at the front line. They're the people that are there working with their teams on a regular basis, sometimes weekly, sometimes monthly, certainly, interactions happening very regularly. So we need those line managers to be absolutely aligned with their role in terms of the application phase of learning. And I think that's why they're so important, is that we cannot do this without them. If we ignore the line managers, the likelihood of learning being applied is pretty low. And I think that's, for me, the big driver behind why we need to engage the line managers.
Great, thanks, Cheryl. Marcelo, have you got anything to add to this particular question?
Yeah, I think and I've seen that in many initiatives that I've been leading, and I think it's based on research that a people leader, a manager that is not naturally positive and supportive of an initiative is actually a big detrimental effect to its impact, and even neutrality. And I know there's research in the space about even neutrality, even a neutral manager that is not naturally openly supporting an initiative is in reality sending a signal to their people that this is not important. And we can probably all relate, even at our personal level, when we have an interaction with our managers, our direct managers, about what matters to them. So in many cases, very important for us in terms of how we prioritize our work. And so when we're leading with learning initiative changes in the organization, making sure we have that strong, active role played by these people is a make or break type of element in the process. And I've discovered that the hard way and the good way on different initiatives, that big involvement, active involvement is key.
Great, thanks, Marcello. I think one of my favourite sayings when I'm working with both learning professionals and first-line managers is that people respect what you inspect. And I think what so often happens is that people come off of learning programmes and their manager never asks them about that learning programme again, and that sends a really strong message to them that actually it's not important and that there's other things that they need to focus on. So I think what you're describing there is that strong partnership is really needed. The manager needs to understand that, they're being respected, and the people that are in their team need to hear that they are seeing this as really, that you're seeing this really important as well. Joanna, anything that you wanted to add?
Yeah, of course, I agree to what both Marcelo and Cheryl said. And I think it's also really important that we want the managers to walk the talk and also to allow time for learning. That's also a cultural difference that we can see, of course. And in order to make the culture of continuous learning, I think it's important that the manager walk the talk there and allow time to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that we commonly talk about within the learning environment is this 70-20-10. Are any of my panel able to talk to that a little bit and how that kind of correlates to why it's so important that we involve managers? Cheryl, I can see you've come off mute.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. I just wanted to pick on a point that Marcello mentioned when he was talking about the importance of involving people managers in this approach. And he talked about change. And I think just to emphasize that sometimes we think about, or people think about learning sometimes as being gaining knowledge, but really what we're talking about is behavioural change. And I think if you can get, line managers to understand that we're talking about behavioural change, it sometimes becomes a bit clearer why we're asking for their involvement, because behavioural change can't happen overnight in a learning event. It has to happen over time. And I think that's really important to emphasise, that it's a change in behaviour we're talking about, not gaining knowledge when we're talking about learning. So I think that's really important. And your question around 70-20-10 and understanding, applying that approach to learning is really key. And Also helping line managers understand why 70-20-10 is important. I think a lot of the time, sometimes when you talk to line managers, they sometimes think a lot about the 10. When they're talking about learning, they're talking about training courses. And I certainly have had conversations with people in the past where we've had to try and move away from just thinking about this 10% in terms of training courses and thinking more about the 70 and the 20. So application in your job, taking this learning and applying it in the real world when you're doing your job. So in the 70%, or the 20% being coached and mentored, again, in the real world around the knowledge that you've gained so that you can apply that and start using that and start really applying your learning. I think that's really important, and not assuming that people always understand that or know about that, because although it's something that learning professionals talk about a lot, it's not necessarily something that line managers will discuss a lot. So ensuring that you communicate that effectively, I think, is really important. Obviously, without patronising or teaching granny to suck eggs, but it's important that everyone has the same terminology and some of that understanding, transferring that across the line managers so they understand why we're doing what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Cheryl. It's really interesting, isn't it? How much time and energy goes into the more formal part of the learning, often the instructor-led part, when actually, as we know, through the 70-20-10 model, that's really only 10% of the learning is that formal instruction bit where we're teaching people the knowledge part. And actually, so much more of it is about the behaviour change, as you've mentioned. So thank you. I'm going to move now on to what happens when we don't engage people managers. I know, Marcella, you said you've had experiences of not doing that so well, and what happens. So I'm going to go to you first on this one to share your worst story of what happens when we don't engage managers.
Yeah, I think, Lucy, what Sherry was mentioning, I think that's the important frame that I always look at our work and our intervention. It's from the lens of driving change and mostly behavioral change. Of course, there is a knowledge component into what we do, but mostly we expect people to adopt new behavior, to change their current behavior into something else, whatever that something else is in the scope of their job. Like in my case, I did a lot with marketeers or salespeople. Maybe there's a new framework of sales approach that needs to be utilized. And so what happens is that I always expect resistance to change. And that's human, that's based on all change methodology, that's a big step, a big chunk. And so failing to give people managers an active role and also providing them with the right set of tools to drive change means that we're really opening up to, on one side, I guess, a lot of failure in driving change, but more importantly, we really don't know what's going to happen. And we may have some employees that may embrace change for personal reasons, and many others that do not even become aware. And Sherry was touching on that before. And I think we can all relate. I can certainly relate as an employee that there are maybe so many different initiatives inside of our large organizations. And unless my manager is playing an active role on highlighting the importance of that and maybe even spend time with me, driving me through that change, very likely I would not even be aware of that, or maybe I will forget 1 second after I receive some communication about the importance of that change. So yes, I think main failure point, and definitely gone through that myself over the years, is that we don't see change spread accordingly in the organization. In particular, when looking at wide initiative, broad initiative, multi-country initiative, very large sales force. You may see pockets of change here and there, but you're not really able to move the bulk of your people into the new state. And that for me is a big failure because, of course, it's great to have a few early adopters moving into the new direction. But when we're thinking about organizational change, we're really interested in that bulk of people that may want to show the new behaviors versus the previous behavior. And that's the main failure point for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. If we can't achieve the outcomes that we've set out to achieve, then, as you said, it's not a success. And I think the most expensive training program is the training program that is never followed up. And that's often the downside that I see when I get asked to support organisations. And one of the first questions I always ask is, what have you tried already to address this problem? And the amount of times I hear them rattle off the amount of investment they've made in training in the past and then the outcomes that they've seen from that training, it really breaks my heart to think of the lack of follow-up that's been done, which is why I think it's so key to start with the end in mind and be really clear from the outset around what the follow-up actually looks like and how you plan to embed the learning and make sure that that change is followed through to behaviour and then ultimately impacting performance. Cheryl or Joanna, do you have anything to add? Joanna, you've come off mute.
Yeah, I think when you said that training that we don't follow it up, I think it's important also to try to think about how to integrate it in existing processes and existing meetings or other follow-up that we already do, because we're all very busy and we will always be busy probably. So I think the key is to actually try to build it into other existing processes, actually, to see how can we learn from our mistakes, for example. Can we celebrate failures, not only successes, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. I think some of our biggest lessons do come through failure, and I think you're dead right that the more we can work within existing processes, the more likely it is to happen, because people won't see that it's a huge investment of extra time. I had a meeting this morning about a program that I'm running next week with the manager, and we were talking about the follow-up and how he intends to follow up, and he was saying what he intends to do is use the existing team meetings that he already has in place and take 5 or 10 minutes in those team meetings over the preceding 4 weeks to really give people the benefit of talking about what they've taken away and how they're starting to apply and embed that knowledge. And so that's a great example of exactly what you're describing there, Joanna. So just really supporting people to find some way that they can embed without it feeling like it's a huge, great investment of time. Cheryl, did you have something to add?
Yeah, just on the kind of the idea of what happens when the managers are not so involved. For me, I think absolutely helping them think about how are they going to sustain the learning is really important, and what plans they can put in place. And like you say, it doesn't have to necessarily be particularly complicated, but it needs to be regular, it needs to be planned, and it needs to be there. But also ahead of any learning initiative, where possible, where I've seen it go wrong is when potentially people managers haven't been involved. It's become a bit of a surprise, or something's been launched to them at the same time as it's been launched to their teams. And that can cause a lot of problems for line managers, because one, they haven't had enough time to absorb the program themselves and understand the program themselves. They may get resistance. Marcello talked about resistance. They may get resistance from team members. And that's really difficult to deal with if you haven't had time to understand potentially what the program is, what the potential resistance may be, maybe plan out how you're going to have those conversations with individuals in your team. So giving line managers forewarning of anything coming, and if possible, giving them some understanding and maybe even taking them through the program or a shortened version of the program, at least so they can understand it, helps mitigate some of those challenges later down the line if they haven't been involved. So where possible, maybe getting a line manager involved in the planning, or a couple of line managers, depending on the scope of the project, so that you've got that insight there. And they can also act as advocates early on as well, which I think is really powerful, to have peer advocates, not just something that comes from the learning department or whichever part of the organisation is running the programme.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Cheryl. Some really top tips there. We're starting to move into some of the practical things that we can consider, which is really great. This whole panel discussion is really thinking about influence, and that's what Cheryl was talking about there. How can we have influence over people that we have no authority over? And when I'm running training programs where we're talking about this, one of the things that we can do is to really think about aligning on shared goals. And so the more we can communicate and get in early with the stakeholders that are involved in the project and start to really understand what they stand to gain from being involved, what they see as an ideal outcome, and form allies, then the more successful that will be, because we all need to meet on a level and understand that everybody will benefit from what comes out of this training if we can translate it to behaviour and then on to performance. Let's move on to the meaty part of the discussion, really, around what have you tried in terms of engaging managers? You've already probably dropped a few nuggets along the way, but let's get really clear for our audience about some of the things that have really worked. We've already had some great advice about making it really non-complicated and part of the regular processes. So what else have we got? Joanna, can I come to you for that?
Sure, yeah. So I work a lot with our global leadership programs that we have. So what we have started to do now is that we build the learning journeys in a tool, and now we also have a manager stream in that learning journey, so we can easily nudge the manager. So, for example, we invite the manager to the kickoff call as optional attendees of the kickoff call for that specific program, an easy way for them to get an introduction of the program and to see what are the main topics and all that. And they will also get some tips on how to encourage their team members to take part in the program and how to maybe share with the team when they are back from the training program or after the learning journey. So that's one example of how we have built it into a process.
Thanks, Joanna. I love the idea of sharing top tips right from the outset in the kickoff meetings, so they're already starting to think about how they can build it into the processes. That's a great idea. Marcelo, have you got anything to share?
Yeah, I think, Lucy, there's a couple of things. One, I think you should always have a specific dedicated track for people leaders, for managers, and so paying a lot of intentional attention to them, both in terms of bringing them on board, communicating clearly to them about the expectation of the role, and also ultimately also building very simple to use tools to drive change. And you may have a quick coaching guide, you may have a conversation starter, you may have a checklist, very simple performance support tools that can really help for them to adopt the change in that conversation, meaningful conversation with their people. And also observational tools like observation checklist. Is my employee doing this? What's been the change before and after? It's always about the simplicity, I think, in terms of driving adoption and really helping them drive the change on our behalf. As Shelley was mentioning before, I definitely don't see the learning professional, the learning team role to drive change at scale. I rather think of ourselves as facilitator of change, but we cannot do that alone. And we are sometimes the initiator of that process, but ultimately we need to rely on people, leaders to drive change. And the only way to do that for me is giving them the right set of tools, because I wouldn't ask them to come out with those tools. I need to provide those myself.
Absolutely. I love that idea. I know one of the quick, easy ways that I do that with the programs that I support in development is to just come up with coaching questions, questions that they can just use on field visits or when they're having check-ins with people in their team to just get a sense of whether they're adopting that and how they're getting on with that. So I love the fact that you build that in automatically as part of your program to be providing those tools up front. Thank you. Over to you, Cheryl.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with the idea of kind of providing practical tools and practical support. So you make it as easy as possible for the line managers to do what you need them to do. I think that's really key. But I guess part of it is also being really clear with them that you need them to be hands-on, you need them to be engaged. Being really clear, as Marcello mentioned, this is not something that's being done by the learning and development department. This is something that we're facilitating and we're supporting, but can only be successful if you as a line manager roll your sleeves up and actually get really involved. Allied to that, a program that we're currently running in animal care at the moment. And the line managers are very key in implementing this program. It's really a sales methodology program. We've spent quite a lot of time with the line managers, upskilling them first, so giving them, if you like, the knowledge and understanding on how this should be applied, and also what good looks like when it's being applied effectively. And one of the simple things that I've been doing with the sales managers is just, again, facilitating a conversation with them as a group around their progress, what's currently working well in terms of implementation, what are the challenges, and giving them a chance really to share with each other some top tips. So it again passes it over to them as a group of leaders, rather than us having all the answers, because we don't have all the answers, but helping facilitate that discussion, so that the managers between themselves can start to support each other and learn from each other quite quickly in that implementation phase. And I think that's really effective as well.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Social collaboration, we know when we look at learning modern learner methodology and the way people are learning in the VUCA world that we're operating in, that ability to socially collaborate, especially when we're not often in the same physical space, creating those opportunities to normalize things that people are experiencing, giving people the opportunity to chat through the challenges that they have, is hugely beneficial, and also giving people the opportunity to learn from one another and learn from the mistakes that each other are having, and work through some of the challenges together. So thank you for sharing that, Cheryl. I just want to pass over to Joanna now to talk about something I think that's quite interesting that's happening at Atlas Copco in terms of how they're supporting that embedding piece. So Joanna, do you just want to chat a little bit more about some of the things that you're just in the process of trialing?
Yeah, so when it comes to the tool that we use and that we could integrate the manager stream in the program, if that was what was meant, that is quite early days for us, but it's also a very powerful way of involving them in an easy way. What I also wanted to mention is that it's also very powerful to form like a sounding board of managers in different levels in the organization to get their feedback on the learning, not only the learning journeys, it could also be like the learning culture, to get not only HR and L&D perspective of things. It's really good to get the feedback early from the managers directly, and also to try new ideas on them, to have a good sounding board actually to discuss with.
That's great, thank you. Yeah, it was the manager's track that I was talking about. So can you share a little bit about, I know it's very early days, but what is it that you're doing and what makes it different?
Yeah, so for example, if we have a learning journey in a manager program, for example, we have a journey starts with a kickoff for the participants, and then we have the main sessions maybe, and maybe some pre-work before that, and a journey. And then we are able to connect the users with the managers, so that the manager also are in that tool. So we can then have a separate stream for the manager, so we can decide what to share with them and when. So we can schedule this beforehand as well. So it's really handy for us from an administrative point of view as well, because we can schedule everything beforehand. So what we've done now is that we invite them to the kickoff, and that's the same kickoff for the participants as well. So we have some information for the managers in that meeting. And then we have some nudges. So we can nudge them, for example, before the program, what they can do, some tips, some like coaching questions, as you mentioned as well. We will also start to having some questions in the beginning of the journey, and then more or less the same questions after, maybe 6 months after, to relate to that observation checklist that Marcelo talked about as well, so we can measure the impact that way. So those are some examples of what we have started to try now. So it would be, of course, interesting to see maybe 6 months ahead to see how we can see the impact.
That's great. That all sounds fantastic. And also being able to use that then to bring in measurement is superb as well, so that you can then start to really measure the outcomes and see whether you've achieved what you set out to achieve. Okay, so I just want to give the opportunity for people to come up on stage and join the conversation if they want to. So in a moment, we will be inviting people up onto the stage. So if you have got a question or you want to join in the conversation, please pop your hand up so that we can get a sense of how many people might want to come up on the stage and just manage the time that we have left more effectively. So whilst we're doing that, I'm just going to move on to thinking about what kinds of things managers could be doing to embed learning more effectively. So we've touched on coaching, asking coaching questions. What other ideas have we got about the kind of things that managers could be doing?
I think you talk about coaching, Lucy, rightfully so. And I think there's also that observational piece, right? That as people, leaders, and managers, we're supposed to spend time with our people, and I think an important element of that is observing people behavior and then being able to provide regular and timely feedback about the expected behaviors versus the observed behavior. And that's an important element, I think, which you mentioned, the book award, a lot of quick changes and I realize the expectation from people sometimes there's so many changes happening at the same time. And so for managers to be really able to identify what are some of the key and more relevant changes to be observed and point them out to their employees. Okay, I've noticed this. And also I would like to see more of that in a timely manner is extremely important. And that's why those simple tools for them to work observation checklists and so forth for me are very important. The other element that I think is always key is what the manager implicitly signal as important. So I have a team meeting with my team. We want to make sure that obviously the topic is not just covered of that changing behavior is actually very supported by my language, my body language, and my messages. Because we know those things are going to become priority for my people. And so again, back to our role and learning professional, if we can help managers really have this conversation more effectively by giving them communication prompts, by giving them some materials that can really help them drive those also team communication, I think it can go a very, very long way.
Great, thank you. I absolutely love that. And I think it also circles back to an earlier comment that we had around really understanding what good looks like and what is it that we're striving for. And I think that then links really nicely into making sure that we've got some clearly defined behaviours as part of our competency framework, so that we're really giving some clear guidance to managers to differentiate between what's kind of developing behaviour versus what is absolutely best practice behaviour when it comes to whatever it is that you're trying to make the change within. Cheryl, over to you.
Thanks, Lucy. I completely agree around the piece around being clear on what good looks like and understanding what those behaviours will look and sound like. And being able to communicate that to your team, I think is really key. And I guess alongside that is creating, if you like, a safe space to practice and make mistakes. If this is a new behaviour, it's not going to be perfect, we know that. But giving the team an opportunity to practice that and thinking about how they're going to create those opportunities. It doesn't have to be a big meeting. It could be a role play with the manager prior to seeing a customer, or it could be peer-to-peer role plays, but helping the team think about opportunities to create that safe space, because the more confident people are, the more likely they're going to actually apply that learning in the real world. But we've got to create opportunities for that to happen and that practice to happen. And I think the other thing that managers can do actively, alongside being really clear about behavioural changes, what that looks like, creating a safe space, I think the other thing is thinking about how they're going to help their team sustain this learning. So, for example, is there something that needs to go into someone's development plan? A specific behavioural change that can be captured in the development plan that's formalised. And back to your point, Lucy, about if something's inspected, people will likelihood work on it and focus on it. Is there an opportunity to have a 20-minute, 10-minute conversation at your regular team meeting about progress, so that people see that the manager is interested, they want this to work, they're supporting it. And as Marcello said, there's a kind of unsaid message in how engaged the manager is or isn't in this, and the conversations they have or don't have. So encouraging managers to be really aware of that is really key, because it's very easy for a program to be undermined just by something the manager wasn't aware of. They didn't ask a question, or it was something it was an afterthought rather than a really useful conversation they had post the learning program.
Thanks, Cheryl. That's really, really key. And it's just making me think of a program that we recently ran at Atlas Copco, where, it's quite a long program, actually. It ran over a series of 9 months, and it was a really successful program. And when we reflected on one of the many things that made it successful, a big part of it was about the engagement of the leaders in the program. So how they showed up, And I mean, not just how they showed up in terms of what they said, because I think that's a really small part, but what did they model and what did they reinforce? And they showed up with enthusiasm. You know, they were regular participants. They walked the talk. And they just really modelled all of the behaviours that we were looking for the team members to take on and adopt. And I think that is so key, because when people have got role models and leaders that they can look to, then it gives them something to aspire to as well. So if you've got a disassociation between what the manager is saying and what the manager is doing, then you often have a disconnect between how that translates into the behaviour of the people that are involved in that particular initiative or programme. So thank you for raising that. So I've just brought Lani up onto the stage. I hope that's the way you present. You pronounce the name.
Yes, it's pronounced Lani. Thank you.
Thanks, Lani.
A very interesting conversation here. We're currently at the University of South Florida in the IT department, and we are trying to focus or align some of the training that we are providing to our employees with the skills and the duties that they do. So my background is adult education, and we've understood that as adults, how we learn, especially if you're in the workplace, it has to be purposeful, right? And because we are restricted by time, restricted by, the environment and the things that we have to do. So when we have to dedicate time to learning, we're taking away the time that we have to do the other things. So what has happened is that we have to be really intentional about the learning we provide, and then really intentional about, after you've learned this particular thing, we expect this particular outcome. So the why behind it, the why behind we're learning, the why behind we're trying to change a behavior or improve a skill has to be very apparent, so that the focus and the dedication to that learning is done. Otherwise, it's just like, I was told to do this, so I'm doing it. And then I check something off the box and I move on. So if we are really intentional about what are your responsibilities, what are your duties in a role, and explain how that's aligned with the skills that you need to perform those duties, and then align that with, and in order to be better at these skills, here is the learning path that you can take, and we expect an improvement in the following areas, the following skills. That has been a little bit helpful in getting the buy-in for learning.
Thanks so much, Lani. You raised some really interesting points there. It's so important that people understand the why. So why are we actually doing this? And I think you've also brought up kind of what was the next question for us to look at, which is what gets in the way of this happening? What do we think gets in the way of managers taking on a more active role? And I think you're right, it's time. Time is such a precious commodity that with the best will in the world, the managers just don't have the time to do all of the things that they need to do alongside the administrative tasks that they often need to do. So I think in the absence of a powerful why, you can see why it gets deprioritized in respect to all the other things that they have to do. Cheryl, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I completely agree. And actually, I was having a conversation yesterday with our people and culture director exactly on this conversation around time. And I think, as you say, Lani, it's even more challenging in an adult learning environment when people have a job to do. And I guess it depends on how people view development as well. Do they see development as being something that's extra, something that's an additional task to take on? Or do they see it as something that will enhance their performance, as you describe, help them in their role? And I guess that's quite an important differentiation, and understanding how people view development. I remember having a conversation a long time ago with someone who was probably looking towards retiring. So the conversation she had with me was, I don't want another role. I don't want to be promoted. Therefore, why do I need to worry about development? And it was a really interesting conversation. And I guess what sat behind it was she saw development as being something for those people who wanted to move into another role rather than in-role development. So we had a really interesting discussion around what development is and what development isn't. And I think that's quite important to kind of just establish that development is for everybody. It's to help everybody in their role, but also, I guess, understanding the individual drivers behind that development. Because what drives one person to develop will be very different to what drives someone else to develop. So it's the kind of what's in it for me as an individual. I guess as a line manager, understanding that for that individual and having that conversation around their own goals, because then there's more of a drive for them to focus on development. So it's not just saying to someone you have to do X or Y in terms of development, but really helping them understand about what the benefits to them would be. That's a really key conversation that I think line managers can have. And that, to a certain extent, might address some of the issues around time. It doesn't take away the challenges of having lots of tasks and operational things to do in a role. But if people can understand the longer term benefit of development, then it may help them just prioritise development a little bit further up the list than maybe it currently sits at the moment. And that goes for, I guess, line managers as well as individuals within that team.
And I think, Lucy, if I can add to share it, I completely agree with Lani, the perspective was bringing. I think that level of embedding and simplicity in the flow of work is a very key component about adult education, in particular. People that are, of course, busy and they have a lot to do and to achieve during a work week. So we're making sure that we are simple with our intervention, and then we're fully embedding what people are doing already and really supporting them at the point of need, rather than some more theoretical learning intervention is key to success. And I also think it's very important, as Cheryl was mentioning. I think there's two different levels. There's the midterm, long-term development for people, and realize some of our initiatives are around that space. We need people to change behaviors over time. We need to acquire new skills that are going to be successful for them to be effective in the future. And so anchoring those, like Jerry was saying before, to, for example, your development plan in a formalized manner, that I think helps a lot, goes a long way. And then at the same time, also more on the short term, the change that we expect, making sure they're fully embedded in the way people work, that is key and paramount. Because at that point, we're really helping people leaders, we're helping managers also drive that transformation. It's not taking time off work. It's not dedicating 3 days of my week to do something on top of my job. Rather, as even a very simple intervention in exactly when I'm working and doing something, and guiding me about doing that something in a different way. So it's that simple and embedded enough. I think we're helping managers also drive the change and be supportive of that change.
Yeah, I think that was an absolute mic drop moment, wasn't it? There's a saying that says that WIIFM is everybody's favourite radio station. What's in it for me? And the more the manager can help the individuals to connect with what's in it for them, then the higher the levels of engagement will be. And there's lots of different ways to make that happen. I mean, one of the things that we do at Purposefully Blended is that we issue digital badges as part of our programme. And what that allows people to do is to be able to add those to their digital CV, their credentials, so that they can see that actually it's really supporting them to have roles, to have skills that go beyond the role that they're in, and potentially support them to move on to new opportunities. And then as part of that digital credential, you can also ensure that you've not only got the formal aspects of the learning in there, but also you're raising the importance of the more informal aspects of the learning curriculum. So the things like the social collaboration, the coaching, the putting things into practice, and really emphasising that the whole learner journey is important, not just the formal instructor-led part of the journey. So in a moment, I'm going to be asking how learning professionals can better support managers and how managers can better support learning professionals. But before I do that, I'm just going to go over to Gail and ask if she's got a question or something she wants to share.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. And I just had a comment because I'm loving this conversation. I am from the island of Barbados, and I have my own training consultancy where I help companies develop training programs for their teams. And our goal is to help everybody learn, grow, and earn together. But why this conversation is so important is that when I first started, one of the things we had to do was to get managers to understand, like, learning is not a take the box. So we need to have this training program for our team, tick the box. I like that. You need to have that conversation where you explain this is what this training is not about knowledge, it's about the learning. And at the end of the day, this is how your team's behavior should change. And which is why I'm enjoying the conversation, because that conversation is very, very important. Setting the expectations. This is what we need from you. Training does not exist in a vacuum. It has to be reinforced. And if you don't reinforce it, you would just have paid me and you would not have gotten any benefit. So it's getting everybody to work as a team and to be on the same page. So I didn't have a question. I just had that comment because this conversation is reinforcing the things that I do, and to get that change, that mindset to change from your team and your managers from the get-go before you even start that training.
Yeah, thanks, Gail. That's such a good point. And, when we think back to some of the models that we talk about, particularly with regards to influence, if we think about I think it's the Colin Bradford model, it particularly focuses on, from the outset, just really understanding what is the influencing goal that you have, or what is the outcome that you're looking for from this particular initiative. And without that, how will you know whether you've been successful or not? So, absolutely, in the position of being a vendor, I see my role and my responsibility is to help my clients to get super clear on that before we even progress on to thinking about what kind of learner journey might be most suitable to achieve that outcome. And, as a big part of that, it's thinking about who are the people that we need to engage along the way. Who are the stakeholders that have a part to play in this and that we need to really engage, and how are we going to do that before we start to even think about rolling things out or scaling things to a broader scale. So thank you very much. So I'm going to move on now to think about how can learning professionals better support managers. So let's just do a quick round up on the stage of everybody. Just one point. How do you think learning professionals can better support managers? So Joanna, let's go to you first. What can we do?
Yeah, I think one thing that I think is very powerful is also the psychological safety and growth mindset to allow for mistakes and failures and share and learn from them instead of hiding them, sort of. So I think it's really important also because we want the people to try new things and be creative. So I'm really passionate about that, and how the manager can really be humble as well to share their own failures. That's also really powerful when it comes to learning. So there I think we as an L&D can really try to come with initiatives and best practices regarding this topic.
Yeah, I absolutely love that, Joanna. So normalising being vulnerable, normalising that growth mindset piece, and how it's, failure is an important step to getting things right and creating a culture where it's okay to do that. Thank you. Cheryl?
I guess for me, it's helping them build an implementable sustainability plan. So helping them build a plan for when the formal learning is done. The formal instructor-led training, as you're calling it, is done, that first piece. And helping them build that implementation plan using the learning process. So helping them understand that learning process and having a plan that's practical that they can apply to ensure that, as Gail mentioned earlier on, that the actual learning that needs to happen actually happens post the formal piece.
Great, thanks, Cheryl. Marcello?
So you're really investing them of that role by bringing them together. And the second one is learning professional driving initiative. We also have the opportunity to listen and learn, and in many cases, adapt and adjust our initiative. I don't know how many things I've learned throughout the years by being part in those cohort discussion with people managers, that it's a lot of aha moments. Okay, now I see. That's a challenge I didn't foresee when I was planning for this. Okay, I understand there's a new stumbling block that I couldn't foresee from my perspective. And so then I can quickly go and adjust the initiative that I've contributed to design.
Great, thanks, Marcello. I think the listening piece is really key, isn't it? For me, that's always the answer to everything is, Can we listen better as learning professionals? Can we understand better what it is that first-line managers want and need in order to drive performance? Can we identify what their currency is? What's the thing that's most important to them? And once we identify that and we speak that language and we build programs that speak that language, then the engagement is going to be so much higher. So I'm conscious of time. We've only got 2 minutes until we close out now. So I just want to do one quick round of our expert panelists to just share one big takeaway or one top tip that they would like to share with our audience. So let's mix it up this time. So let's go to you first, Cheryl.
Thanks, Lucy. I guess if I had to think of one thing that would help this be successful is, I would say, define success with the managers at the beginning before the program is rolled out. So if possible, get them involved in defining what success looks like at the beginning of the program. Then they've got skin in the game then. So I think where possible, that's what I would try to do.
Love that. Thanks, Cheryl. Marcello?
I would say, and the probably is a cliche, but keep it simple in terms of what's the desired change and how it's described, and also in terms of what tools and solutions we provide to people manager. Keep it very, very simple. There's no time for anything else.
Thank you. I love that. Joanna?
Yeah, I think I will build on that, Marcelo, to try to build it into the process. I think that's the key, because it's we are all busy and we will always be. So try to use the existing forums that you already have to follow up on learning and development.
Thank you. And for me, it's about co-creation. So the more we can co-create and partner, then the more successful these things will be. So really seeking to understand and build that alliance between learning and first-time managers will ensure that we get the success and that we can celebrate the success as one team, rather than everything feeling more disjointed and in separate teams and directorates. So I just want to close out now by saying thank you so much. Thank you to the people that were brave enough to come up on this stage. Gail and Lani, you both added some great quality to the conversation. So thank you for leading the way. Hopefully next time more people will feel that they can come up to this stage. Thanks so much to all my wonderful panelists for giving up so much of their time. They added absolute gold over the last hour in sharing so graciously some of the experiences and the things that they've tried. I just want to talk about our next LinkedIn audio event in line with International Coaching Week. The focus will be on coaching as a leadership superpower. Do ensure that you connect and also follow the Purposefully Blended page, and that will ensure that you don't miss any of our future events. And if you're interested in having more insights into influence, perhaps learning more about the Cohen-Bradford model that I've talked a little bit about, then go to our website and register for our Purposeful Insights. And in there, you'll receive regular thought leadership pieces that cover many of the useful techniques and models to support you with all elements of the Purposefully Blended impact system. So thanks so much for your time, and whatever time zone you are on, I really hope that you have a great weekend when it arrives. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great weekend. Bye. Bye-bye.
Have a good weekend. Bye.
You've been listening to Partnership Panels from Purposefully Blended. We'd love you to join our ever-growing community of learning professionals and people managers that are inspired to transform performance. Please pop over to our website, www.purposefullyblended.co.uk. Join our mailing list, access our historical show notes, and download our thought leadership pieces. Would you like to be a panelist? Perhaps you'd like to propose a topic for our next panel discussion. Drop me a message, Lucy Phillip, on LinkedIn. We'd be delighted to hear from you. Thanks for listening, thanks for connecting, and let's continue to make learning a strategic asset together.